speaking, the Paradiso is even set against the others that I'm very happy to see you all. The questions, as I would like to emphasize, I want this to be an existentialist kind of adventure. That is, it's something that today's discussion, I would want to be able to access our own experiences, of what the deepest desires we have are, what the fulfillment of those desires would look like. Does Dante speak to that at all? And that's because this is what he's talking about. He's also talking about a mission that he believes he received, one way or another, however you want to figure his, the true status of the vision that he's recounting here. He is absolutely convinced that he was commissioned to come back down from these heights to write a prophetic poem that would hopefully make our lives better. And that's what he kind of says in the letter to Can Grande, that he wants to lift us up from our misery and set us on the path to happiness. That's the goal here in writing the Commedia. He wants our lives to be comedies, that is, to have a happy ending. And in a world in which there is so much anguish, that I would argue that, again, as I said in the first lecture, that Dante really is essential to make it through our own personal dark nights and in the kind of corporate dark night of the world of our time. So if we give it credence, even if we disagree with the Christian theology here, or his particular Christian positions, which are unique to him, and we've seen already how he stakes out his own way. If one still says, I don't believe that he's got this thing right about the salvation of souls or whatever, but he reaches down to where I am most in need of light, something tortured and wounded in myself that needs the light. So in the last half of the Paradiso, we're looking at the traversal by Beatrice and Dante of the last 4 heavens of the planets. So we got the last 3, we've got Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And then we have the primum mobile, which encircles them, and that's not the prime mover. That's a common mistake. It's the first movable. So it's the first thing that's moved by between the planets and the primum mobile is the stars, the zodiac, the crystalline sphere. But then beyond that is the first movable thing, the fastest sphere, the one that imparts the mystical energy of God himself, the Empyrean, to the other everything in the world that we see and all the planets that surround us. So that's the big itinerary. The Empyrean is that realm beyond all space and time, which is God's proper dwelling place, and it is that unique kind of struggle that Dante wants to put before us of understanding how that invisible reality, which has no extension, it's a point that isn't even a mathematical point, but a point that contains all virtuality that we see around us, that point somehow can move this massive universe, which even if Dante were to know how large the universe actually is, he would not have been, I think, thrown off in his vision, because as the Moonspot discourse shows us, the point is a qualitative difference between God and the world that depends on him. All right, so we have that question. In Mars, we have the treatment of, what we see as Cacciaguida. This is the great forefather of Dante, the great-great-grandfather that he's using to be his guide. So when Aeneas goes down to the underworld in Aeneid, and the Aeneid book 6, the great meeting there is with his father Anchises. Dante is going to meet his great-great-grandfather XXXIII, who was a crusader in the Second Crusade, and he died in 1147. And what XXXIII does is present us yet more political commentary, partly in this kind of genre of the good old days, right? That back when he was around, the city of Florence had noble families and had nobility of spirit, and how things have fallen in Dante's time. So that's part of it. But also you have a very personal accounting of Dante's future, as Aeneas will receive from Anchises the future of Rome. What Dante receives from XXXIII is the future of his own life, how it will be in exile. So we definitely want to look at some of those passages. We have that great passage about how he's going to find out, Dante's going to learn how hard it is to live the condition of exile. It's very, very moving. So this is, I want to read a few lines here in Canto 17. And this is line 49. This is the plan, already set in motion, that soon will bring success to him who plots it, where Christ is bought and sold all day. This is a prophecy that Boniface VIII, the Pope at the time the Commedia is happening, he's setting in motion a plot that will end up with the exile of Dante. Right? The populace shall blame the injured party, as it always does, and that's a very moving observation. That, in fact, in the ways of the world, the powerful tend to chew up the powerless, and the powerless tend to be blamed. And this we see in a lot of instances. It's something the Me Too movement was trying to call out, I think, and also indeed with the current struggle for racial justice. The populace shall blame the injured party, as it always does, but vengeance shall bear witness to the truth that metes it out. You shall leave behind all you most dearly love, and that shall be the arrow first loosed from exile's bow. You shall learn how salt is the taste of another man's bread, and how hard is the way going down and then up another man's stairs. That's one of the most famous tercets in the Commedia, and rightly so. How salt is the taste of another man's bread. So, I mean, the one thing that makes exile possible to survive is hospitality, the care of others, right? But it's still, for a man, a bitter thing to have to accept. But that's part of the burden that XXXIII is prophesying for his spiritual son and his descendant. Now, it's also very important to note, how hard is it to go down and then up another man's stairs? And it's important that it's in that order, because if you're staying in another man's house in the morning, when you leave to do your thing, you're going down the stairs, and in the evening you're going back up. So that's important to note that in in another canto to come, Dante will talk about how he was always talking about the Virgin Mary as he would get up in the morning and as he would return in the evening. So we combine those scenes for actually kind of a journalistic account of how his days went in exile. But there's also this question about going down and then up, which is you see it in Plato, of course. I went down to the Piraeus, which is at the beginning of the Republic. The way up is the way down. Dante, the pilgrim, has gone down to the very depths, right? And then he's going up. So there's that grand movement is being signaled here. And then also when he receives the beatific vision at the end of this poem, he's got to go back down and do the witnessing to what it means to live for the good, for the true good, and hopefully therefore to go back up again, along with a lot of other people that he would be bringing along with himself. So it's a very It's a celebrated line, set of lines for a lot of reasons, but there's a lot packed in there. So hopefully we can say more about XXXIII's very, very moving kind of presentation. All right, so in the next sphere, we're going to Jupiter. And in Jupiter, we find the very interesting phenomenon of all the blessed arranging themselves into an eagle. So we're going to see 3 eagles in the Paradiso. We've seen the one, which is the banner of Rome, which Justinian talks about in Cantos 6. Here we're going to see this eagle of the heaven of Jupiter. And the first thing, though, before they form themselves into an eagle, the souls, and here a reminder of the mechanics of the thing, the souls, these are all saints in the Empyrean, that is in the timeless place, the placeless place and timeless time of God. They come down to each of the appropriate spheres, appropriate to their rank in heaven, and because they're eager to see Dante and to help him. And they're filled with love for Dante. And they show up in these spheres, and they interact according to the qualities that belong to themselves as unique persons, but also according to the kind of corporate identity that they have as belonging under these specific stars, these specific planets. So those in the sphere of Jupiter are looking to preserve justice. So the first 3 spheres, the moon, Mercury, and Venus, are, as I recall to you, were forms of defective theological virtues. You had the moon was defective faith, Mercury's defective hope, and Venus was defective charity, defective love. So what we have in the outer 4 planets are the cardinal virtues. And so in the sun, you have prudence, and that's where we met all practical wisdom. We met all of the great Thomists and Dominicans. And we recall, of course, that by putting Thomas and Bonaventure at the head of their own circles there, Dante is setting himself up as someone who reconciles opposites or synthesizes great differences. In the heaven of Mars, we have fortitude, which is the virtue of courage, which is appropriate for those who are martial, that want to fight the wars. And then in Jupiter, we have the cardinal virtue of justice. And in Saturn, it's going to be the cardinal virtue of temperance. So it's an interesting arrangement of those virtues. And then finally, in the crystalline sphere, the stellatum, the starry sky, the zodiac, you have the great, the exam, right? It's so funny. It's very funny that you have this exam that's being run by the 3 privileged apostles, Peter, James, and John, and it's going to be on the 3 theological virtues. So you see, it's not, again, as clear as the Purgatorio as far as structure, but there is a real structure as far as the virtues here. So back to Jupiter. Jupiter is the sphere that it coordinates to justice, and obviously justice is a deep concern of Dante's throughout this poem. And the denizens that come down from heaven, the heaven of fire at the Empyrean, to meet Dante, spell out the words diligite justitiam qui judicatis terram. So that is, these are the first words of the Book of Wisdom, which is not in everybody's Bible, but it is part of the Catholic scriptures, Solomon's Book of Wisdom. So love, justice, you who rule the earth, or you who judge the earth. Diligite justitiam qui judicatis terram. So that last word there, oh good, thank you, James. Yes, so after that, and it's kind of funny, it's like cheerleaders or the band or a band on the marching field forming letters. They all form, they're marching into D, I, L. So it's very cinematic and funny. They're spelling out each letter in turn. Give me a D, give me an eye, and that's how it goes. And then they end up on an M, because teram ends with M. And then new souls, or I think it's the angels actually, descend on the top, maybe new souls, descend on the top of the M. And so the second form there is a lily, which that's a little esoteric. But then finally, the M takes the shape of an eagle. So that's the second of the three eagles that we see. The last eagle is going to be John the Evangelist, who is represented typically in iconography as an eagle. So you go from the eagle of empire to this eagle, which is still kind of empire, but really is higher than empire. And then finally, you've got the great critic of empire, really, John the apostle, in writing the book of Revelation, is criticizing Rome profoundly, criticizing Rome, and on Dante's reading, because he takes the Johannine imagery at the end of Purgatorio and makes clear the Church of Rome has become Babylon, has become the whore of Babylon. So the whore of Babylon, and that's so it's a very powerful thing that if you track the images, that you've got three eagles and it ends up concentrated on one man. And we have reason to think that Dante identifies himself with lots of figures. He identifies himself with John because he's going to be the great prophet who is wrapped up in a vision and is going to have to write what he sees, right? He's going to do what John does in the apocalypse. He's been given an apocalypse. He's been shown what's behind the curtain. And he's going to present it. And so he's a partisan of Rome, as it were, but he's also a critic of Rome, and that's part of his charism. All right, so that's a fascinating interval. And then they go on to talk about these bad kings, that pestilential kings, and we could talk about that. But then finally, there is this question that is burning in Dante's mind. And any of you who got to this canto note probably thought, well, David's probably pretty happy about this question of the salvation of those who are outside the visible confines of the church. I could not have hoped for, I mean, the first time I was working through the whole Commedia, for whatever reason, I just didn't have that question quite as much in my head, or it wasn't, I don't know. But I feel fully justified now, because in the eye of the eagle, you have the very pupil of the eye is David. So obviously Dante identifies himself with David, and I'm gratified by that, by my name, right? But he identifies himself with David, of course, because he's a king, and so he's politically active, and he's a poet, right? So and the first words out of Dante the Pilgrim's mouth in the beginning of the whole journey was Miserere Mei, which is from Psalm 50, the great penitential psalm. So Dante has David in the very pupil of the great eagle of Jupiter. And then the eyebrow has Constantine and Trajan, but it also has this person named, well, okay, Trajan is weird. And we've already mentioned this before. Trajan, so it's like Statius. You've got a pagan who somehow ends up saved. Now, with Trajan, you've got a medieval legend that, in fact, Gregory the Great had gone to pray at Trajan's tomb that he could be saved. So he was resurrected. Trajan accepted the faith and then died. So he goes to heaven that way. So that's a funny way to save people. But if that could happen for Trajan, I mean, there's also the tradition that Paul had prayed for Virgil. And that's the question I've been framing this in terms of whether Virgil could be saved, right? Obviously, I'm very pro that position. So you have something parallel to Statius, a surprising pagan convert, but it's after Christ. So in theory, that's not as difficult to deal with, in theory. Though having a resurrection in the middle of time, it's a lot of work to get one man saved, right? But then you have the situation of pagans before Christ. And of course, the big one is Cato, who commits suicide before Christ, and he's saved. But here in the eyebrow of the eagle, you have this, and Dante's having fun with this, but he has this guy named Ripheus. So this is Canto 20, line 67. Who in the erring world below would think that Trojan Ripheus should be the fifth among the holy lights along this arc? Who indeed? Because Ripheus actually shows up in maybe 4 lines of the Aeneid. He's a bit player. Now, what Virgil says about him is that he's justissimum the most just of the Teucrians, of the Trojans. And out of that, on that thin basis, Dante creates this. He just creates this. Well, for one thing, Ripheus, of course, is another mythological character. This isn't actually a person out of history. So he saves this pagan, and indeed, this pagan becomes something like a Saint Paul, which is weird. So that's a question we can pursue. I don't want to belabor it, but I feel very justified because that's a weird thing for Dante to do. And the other evidence, of course, is at the very end, because in the discussion about how many angels there are, and it's not exactly how many angels can dance on the head of the pin, it's a very important question as to, is there a finite number of angels? Are the angels countable? And what Dante seems to fall on is that the angels are numberless, but not, obviously not infinite, which wouldn't make a lot of sense, but they can't be counted. And Dante, we know, believed from the Convivio that his theory was that God created the human race to replace the angels that fell. On his understanding, that was a tenth of the angels fell. So a tenth of an uncountable number is a large number. And in fact, the celestial rose is figured as so large, it could easily fit every human who's ever been born. So I'll just put that out there and just say that Dante is not committed to universalism as a dogmatic position. So that's David Bentley Hart's position, right? Which is, as tempting as that might be, there's a lot of problems with that. And in fact, it undercuts moral striving. But what I call the Balthasarian position, which is the hope that every human be saved, I think Dante is very strongly, at least leaning in that direction, which I just take to be more or less consonant with Christian faith. All right, in the heaven of Saturn, you have the contemplatives. So here you have Jacob's ladder going from Saturn. It's fascinating. This ladder goes from Saturn all the way up into the Empyrean. And here he meets Peter Damian, who was one of the great reformers of the church. And so that's moving. It's also very strange if one thinks about why would temperance be in the seventh heaven, right? The seventh planetary sphere. Why is temperance the one in the place of honor here? And I think it has to do with the constant critique of avarice that Dante is always launching. In fact, Beatrice will go into another invective against cupidity at the end of this, at the end of her time as guide. Which, so for those of you who weren't able to read to the end or read past Canto 29, the big surprise is that Beatrice herself has to give way as a guide. And it's an interesting moment. I mean, the moment where Virgil is replaced by Beatrice is deeply moving. Before she leaves, she gives Dante a final lesson. So the heaven of Saturn, though, in the end is, so not only do they meet Peter Damian, but we also have the exam. Sorry. In the next, beyond the seventh heaven, you have the starry sphere, the zodiac, and there you get the examination by Peter, James, and John on the theological virtues, and there's a lot of interesting things there. But then finally, when we get to the prima mobile, which is the first movable sphere, we have two lessons on angels, angelology as it's called technically, and that's the last thing that Beatrice really is going to get to do, and I will want to read a little bit of her farewell, which is striking. So this is something I would invite questions about, because people don't like that she leaves completely on fire for righteous judgment to fall upon evil hopes. I mean, basically that's what her last lines are about. So in Canto 29, sorry, it's Canto 30. So at the very end of Canto 30, these are her last words in the Commedia. This is line 130. See our city with its vast expanse, see how many are the seats already filled, few are the souls still absent there. So from the prima mobile, she's pointing, actually, no, this is actually after they've left the prima mobile, they've gone into the Empyrean, and she's pointing out the great stadium rows. So I can't quite depict, I don't know if James was able to get a good picture. There's the God is represented by a point, and it shoots a ray of light, the lumen gloriae, and it bounces off the convex surface of the prima mobile, and it bounces off and reflects, and out of that bouncing, a rose is formed, this massive luminous white rose. And it's kind of flat. It's more like a salt spray rose. It's not as full as a regular cultivated rose. And it's flat, so it's like this, but it's huge, and formed by the reflected light of the singularity of God. And in the petals, it's a stadium seating where there's these all the saints are there, and the angels are buzzing around like bees. It's a fascinating. Anyway, Beatrice says, "This is our city. See it. And in that great seat which draws your eyes for the crown already set above it, before you shall dine at this wedding feast, shall sit the soul of noble Henry." So even at they've broken out of space and time. Beatrice is still talking about politics and talking about Henry VII in this case, the one that Dante had hoped would unite the empire. And she goes on in 139, blind cupidity. So noble Henry, who was not accepted by Italy, and she's now going to lay into Italy. Blind cupidity, bewitching you, Italy, has made you like the infant dying of hunger who shoves his nurse's breast away. So when a kid goes on a nursing strike, you think, this is not rational, child, you need to eat. And that's what Beatrice is comparing Italy to a child that's gone on a nursing strike. At that time, the prefect of the sacred court will be a man who will not make his way on the same road by daylight as he will by night. This is Clement V, who conspired against Henry and therefore earns a place in hell. But short shall be the time God suffers him in holy office, for he shall be thrust down there where Simon Magus gets what he deserves, and push that fellow from Anagni deeper down. So remember, in the Inferno, we had the popes were being condemned for simony, for selling spiritual goods, and it was Nicholas or something like that. It was flapping, and he thought, "Oh, are you here already?" And it's talking to Dante the Pilgrim, and in fact, Boniface. He thought Boniface. So Dante's already predicted Boniface VIII is going to go down there. Here, he has Beatrice predict that the next successor, Clement V, who would take the church into the Avignon captivity, is going to be there. These are the last words of Beatrice. So lots of people don't like that. But what I would like us to see is that Dante has not turned Beatrice into a ghost. There are a lot of people, even Hollander kind of doesn't want Dante to still like her, the way she looks and all that. Dante loves the way she looks, and he's still full of eros. I mean, it's not sinful eros, but it's truly eros. So by having Beatrice say these as her last words, we know that Dante is confirming the body and time and contingency and politics as essential to care for. So that's that. So I will wrap it up here because we can talk about the beautiful vision at the end. The questions. Number one, is it fitting for heaven to be so concerned with politics and church corruption? How does the heavenly city relate to earthly cities? Number two, the education of Dante the Pilgrim is meant to bear fruit in poetic and prophetic witness. In what ways has he been prepared for this vocation? And number three, whatever one's belief, is this description of the Empyrean moving? Does it seem familiar or strange? Does it evoke desire? Does it raise an echo in your heart? And number four, do you feel transformed by the traversal of this immense comedy? Might it affect how you live?